We continue now with the our discussion of the ongoing rebellion in BeMidbar in Numbers, and we got to the story of Korah. So yes, Josh.
So I was very intrigued as to really the backstory behind Korah, because I don't think anything in the Torah comes without some sort of, antecedent. And in the beginning of BeMidbar, when the Levites were being separated out to their tasks, the different clans of the sons of Levi,
Yes.
it's the clan from which Korach descends, the the Kohites.
Yes.
Kahat here, Ben Kahat,
Right.
but translated as Kohathites. They were they were given a very interesting job, and that was to carry. Basically, they were in charge of all the different sacred objects.
Right. Bakatef Yisau. They had to carry on their shoulder, literally.
Right. They didn't get carts to carry them. You're right. They had to carry them on their shoulders. And God specifically tells Aaron, look, don't. They have this job, but he says in chapter 4, verse 18, do not let them be cut off from the Levites. So it would seem that the job is a little bit tangential.
Yeah,
to
that's
what the
four
jobs are.
17 to 20, right.
Right. And then in 20, right, they're admonished, look, but don't let the Kohathites go inside the tent of meeting and witness the dismantling of the sanctuary lest they die. That was in verse 20. Right. So it's by Korah trying to rebel and claim, hey, we should be able to do this too. Nobody's any better. He's disrespecting, obviously, the chain of command and the original assignments, number one. And number two, the chapter is just bringing to fruition exactly what God said would happen.
That they will be cut off.
You take it upon yourself.
Right.
And you'll die.
Right. And that's a good point. Right. Yeah. It's exact. And this is part of what we're going to do, like to look at the full picture of the book. That's why we're going. You realize that as we were doing direct Tanakh, at each point we took a different scope of how it looked. Like with Bereshit, we went very meticulously word by word. In Ruth, we looked at the bigger picture of the whole book, and here we're going to look at the chapter of Book of Midbar. It's like 30 something chapters, and we'll see that there is really there's a clear division in the book between the first and second parts, to the extent that the rabbi said that there's actually two separate books. Or three when they count the division itself, the unit that divides the two parts as a unit by itself. But that's a very good observation in terms of the what is happening with Bnei Kehat. The other reference you made is to chapter 7, verse 9. V'livnei Kehat lo natan ki avodat hakodesh aleim bakatef yisau. He gave 2 wagons to the Gershonites. He gave 4 wagons to the son of Merari, and he gave nothing to the sons of Kehat, because they have to carry it upon their shoulders. And also maybe they saw that as demeaning. Why are we not getting carts? And remember that later on in the book of Shemuel, where when David carries the ark, he carries it on an ark, and someone dies because of that wagon. So something here is entangled. We go back to chapter 18, and we'll see that. Chapter 17. In chapter 16, they present the fire, and they're destroyed, and Korah and his followers are confrontational. They stand in front of the tent, and they are swallowed by the earth. And in chapter 17, God tells Moshe to use the pans or the censers to plate the altar. And why is that? Note this statement in verse 5. למען אשר לא יקרב איש זר אשר לא מזרע אהרון להקטיר קטורת. To the end that no common man that is not of the seed of Aaron draw near to burn incense before the Lord. And the following day, the people complain about them. Vayilonu kol alav bnei Israel they complain, and what is the complaint? You have killed the people of the Lord. God says, I'm going to destroy all of them. Aaron takes the incense and brings it to the congregation, and he saves them. But as a result, again, at the end of the chapter, they say this is impossible. Everyone who would come near, it's a repetition, akarev, will die. Surely we shall all perish. And in chapter 18, he says, do not worry, the Levites will serve the temple, and no one should come close to the altar. V'zar lo yikrav alechem, a common man shall not draw near you, and there will be no more ketzev, there will be no more wrath upon the Israelites in verse 5. And again, he concludes with Ve'azar karav yumat, and he who draws near shall be put to death. Like we saw before, after the story of the scouts, there was a pause, there was a break dealing with some laws of sacrifices. Here again, in the end of chapter 18, sacrifices. Chapter 19, the red heifer. Chapter 20 starts with another rebellion. We have no water. They congregate on Moshe and Aaron. God says, talk to the rock and it will give forth its waters. But Moshe, instead of talking to the rock, he does, but then in verse 11, he struck the rock with his rod twice. And God tells them, Yan lo emantem bi, because you did not have faith in me, you will not bring those people to the land I promised them. So, and it's interesting because the term here is emantem, which is from emunah, faith, right, belief. And we've seen this before in chapter 12 about Moshe. My servant Moshe is not so. He is trusted in all my house, ne'emanhu. So we go back to chapter 20, we see that Moshe is being told that he is not showing trust in God, but that's not the end of the troubles of the people. Again, they talk against God and against Moshe. In chapter 21, verses 4 to 9, they're being plagued with the fiery serpents, and then they pray. They ask Moshe for forgiveness, and he prays to God. Chapter 22, they are now camping across from the nation of Moab. Balak, the king of Moab, fears the nation, and he summons Balaam to curse them. It doesn't work for him, but when he leaves, something strange happens. In chapter 25. In chapter 25, after he fails several times to curse the Israelites, we read this, and Israel abode in Shittim, and the people began to commit harlotry with the daughters of Moab, and they called the people unto the sacrifice of their gods, and the people did eat and bowed down to their gods. You remember that we discussed that with the issue of sacred prostitution. This is what happens here. It's a harlotry that is associated with paganism, but that's a severe sin here. God says, "You shall slay every man who have joined unto the Baal of Peor." And behold, in verse 6, one of the children of Israel came and brought unto his brethren a Midianite woman in the sight of Moses, in the sight of all the congregation, and they were weeping at the door of the tent of meeting. And as I think we've explained earlier, his act, this is not about promiscuity, it's not about desire, it's about establishing a pagan ritual. He says this is how we should worship our gods, by committing harlotry at the temple. Now, look at this term, vayakrev. Karav is to be close. It's the same verb that is used when speaking about sacrifices, and it's also the verb that is used in chapter 18, verses 7, Ve'azar hakarev yumad, the common man who draws near will be put to death. And here in chapter 25, we see that this common man, one of the children of Israel, is coming close, is drawing near, Karav, with the Midianite. Pinhas kills him. This is, we can see, sort of the end of the troubles of the Israelites in the desert. Then we have a census which reflects the first census in the desert, in the book of Numbers. Then the daughters of Tzlofhad come and talk to him, to Moshe. We read about the sacrifices and the korbanot again, and it ends with the war against Midian. And here again, there's a breach. Moshe is upset at the Israelites for letting some people live. Chapter 32. Another breach of trust is the children of Reuben and children of God would like to stay on the other side of the Jordan, and God says this is not. Moshe is very angry with them. He says this conveys the message that you do not want to go into the land of Israel. He says you're going to destroy everyone because of that behavior, but they promise that they will go ahead and become the pioneers in the war. Chapter 33 is their description of their travels and how to divide the land of Israel, and it ends with in chapter 35 and 36. 35 speaks about the cities of refuge, to where an accidental killer can run away, and with the inheritance given to the daughters of Tzlofhad, or any woman who marries someone from another tribe. So if we go, now we start from chapter 11, we went almost all these chapters to 36. What we find is it's interspersed with several chapters that speak about sacrifices and what will happen when you come to the land, as if to say that despite all these travesties and everything that is happening in the desert, you will get to the land eventually. You have something to look forward to. But other than that, it's almost like an ongoing down spiral ride in a roller coaster, and there are no breaks. One thing leads to another. We never have the time to float and just breathe a little air. There are at least 20 cases of rebellion at all levels, and that really brings us to the question whether maybe this is exactly the message of the book. That's why all these incidents are gathered sort of in one place to teach us a message. So we go back. Let's go back to the first chapter of Numbers and see what we have there. So what do we have in the beginning of Numbers? We have in chapter 1 the census, very detailed census for each camp, for each tribe. In chapter 2, it's the description of the camp. How do they camp? In the east, it's Yehuda, Issachar, Zevulun. In the south, Reuben, Shimon, and Gad. In verse 14, and then in the middle, the ark. Then the people of Ephraim with Manasseh and Benjamin, and then on the in the north it'll be Dan, Asher, and Naphtali. This is in chapter 2. Chapter 3 gives us another census. This time is the census of the Levites and the redemption of the firstborns. Chapter 4 is the description of how to cover the tabernacle and how to travel with it. and which is the work of each one of the tribes of the Levites. Chapter 5. Chapter 5, we read about the commandment to drive away from the camp all who are lepers, or they have an issue, meaning a sexually transmitted disease, or unclean because of the impurity of the dead. Then a segment about sinners, a segment about the deviant woman, a woman who is suspected by her husband to have an extramarital affair. Chapter 6 speaks about the Nazirite, the Nazir, who takes a vow to not drink wine or eat anything that is associated to grapes, and not to take a haircut, and not to become impure. And it concludes with the blessing, the priestly blessing. That's chapter 6. Chapter 7. I know it's a little tedious, but we have to go through, to see the structure of the book in order to understand this global picture. Chapter 7, we read about the sacrifices of the chieftains of the tribes. 12 chieftains, 12 heads of tribes, and the amazing thing is that their sacrifice or their offering is exactly the same thing. Those psukim repeat 12 times. Listen. And his offering was 1 silver dish. The weight thereof was 130 shekels, 1 silver basin of 70 shekels, after the shekel of the sanctuary, both of them full of fine flour mingled with oil for a meal offering, 1 golden pen of 10 shekels full of incense, 1 young bullock, 1 ram, 1 he lamb of the first year for a burnt offering, 1 male of the goats for a sin offering, and the fourth sacrifice of peace offering, 2 oxen, 5 rams, 5 he goats, 5 he lambs of the first year. This was the offering of. Up until this point, it's the same exact phrasing for each and every one of the 12 tribes. Why wasn't the Torah able to say, on the first day, that was the prince of this tribe, and the second day, this prince of that? They all brought the same offering, which is this. Instead, we have a repetition of at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 verses times 12 presidents or chieftains, 72 verses, which could have been condensed to 6 only. Why such repetition? Why such redundancy? That's chapter 7. Chapter 8, it's the consecration of the Levites. Chapter 9 is the commandment regarding the Pesach and the story of how they traveled with trumpets that gather the whole nation. And finally, in chapter 10, verse 11, Vayhi b'shana shenit b'chodesh hasheni b'esrim b'chodesh. It's almost like a symbolic. The second year, second month, the 20th of the month. It's all second. It's okay. We are now in the second stage of launching the missile. The first stage was done. This is the second year, second month, 20th day of the month. They finally travel. Vaisro barishona, they took their first journey. It's the first journey of the nation following God. Al pi Adonai biad Moshe. They travel the way they were described before, Yehuda, Yisachar, etc. And then Moshe speaks with Hobab, the son of Reuel, the Midianite. We are journeying unto the place of which the Lord said, I will give it to you. Come with us, and we will do you good, for the Lord has spoken good concerning Israel. Yitro, Hovav says, I will not go, I will depart to my own land and to my kindred. And he said, Moshe said, I pray thee, for as much as you know how we are to encamp in the wilderness, and you shall be to us instead of eyes, come with us, and the good that God will give you will share with you as well. And they traveled from the mount of the Lord for 3 days, and the Ark of the Covenant went before them 3 days' journey to seek out a resting place for them. And the cloud of the Lord was over them by day when they set forward from the camp. Let's assume that the book of BeMidbar would have ended here. Would that be a nice ending?
Yes, it would, actually.
It would be a fabulous ending. It's so beautiful. We went through 10 chapters detailing exactly how the nation should behave, right? The tribes, the census, the roles of each person, and now they're traveling together, everything is in order, they're looking for a resting place. What could go wrong? Right? That's the question.
Everything?
Nothing can go wrong, right? And then everything goes wrong because the next chapter is chapter 11, where the people rebel. They complain about food, about drink, about water, whatever you could complain about. They complain about. Moshe loses trust in God. God loses trust in Moshe. Miriam and Aaron speak against Moshe. Miriam becomes a leper. Then the scouts go and they come back and we don't want to go. And then Korah. And then the man who gathers wood. And what? Now you ask, what could go right? Nothing goes right. What is happening here? Now, here we read this, Vahi b'tzo Aaron v'amer Moshe, and it came to pass when the ark set forward, Moshe said, Rise up, you Lord, and let your enemies be scattered, and let them that hate you flee before you. And when it rested, he says, Return, O Lord, unto the 10,000s of the families of Israel. The actual translation to be, Return God with, or return thee. Return thee. We have an echo. The translation should be really return with the myriads of thousands of Israel, which is a strange statement. Some scholars, Bible scholars, wanted to say that there is a similarity to some pagan constructs of the chariots of God or the chariots of the king. But the interesting thing here, even though we're doing direct Tanakh, we're just doing the Pshat. You see those two signs that are here in the text of in the Hebrew text. They're supposed to be the letter Nun written backwards. It's called Nunim Afuchot, the inverted Nun. It's also found in the scroll. Let me see if I could find this. 1 second, show it to you. This was added later on by the people who wrote the commentary, or some believe it's an oral tradition that goes all the way back to Mount Sinai. This is questionable, but it will take at face value. Someone at a certain point added those two noons that look like brackets, actually. And I think that this is the key to understanding the book of BeMidbar. What they do, those two letters, the rabbis say that this is that the book of BeMidbar is actually 3 books, all up to verse 35 of chapter 10. Those 2 verses, 35, 36, and the rest of the book. What they were saying is that this is like a divider that someone stuck in the middle of the book, and I see the 2 noons, the 2 inverted noons, as a sign, sort of a road sign that someone placed deliberately upside down or backwards to make us look at the scenery. Because we could have read the whole book, which I think probably is something that I did most of my life, without realizing that there is a deep crisis and a major shift of the scenery, of the atmosphere, after the 10th chapter. We have 10 chapters that provide one landscape, and this landscape changes completely in the next chapters. So, if I look now at, let's go back to the beginning. Let's say this is what I think we find. I'll say first the general, what I think is the message, or the structure of the book of BeMidbar. The book of BeMidbar is built of 2 sections. They're not the same length. The first is shorter than the second. The first segment of BeMidbar is the first 10 chapters, and what they present a what we'd call utopia. It's the perfect form of government, where everything is in order, everything is in place. You realize how much emphasis is put on things being in place, people being counted. They each know their right place in the camp, and also there is a very strong emphasis on boundaries. the Torah keeps repeating the phrase, he who breaches the boundaries will die. Now, it might seem cruel when we think, why would, if you have a camp and I step from my camp into your camp, or from my camp into the Holy of Holies, or into the sanctuary, why would I be put to death? But I think that we could understand in maybe in different contexts that breaching boundaries could really carry very serious, could have very serious consequences. For example, what if in a hospital, someone who's not authorized to be in the OR just decides to walk in the middle? That's a serious. Or in places where you need security clearance, that we understand. What if let's take something that maybe is simpler for most people. What if someone who's not a teacher, who's not a certified teacher, decides to pretend that he is a teacher and start teaching? As documented famously in School of Rock, if you remember this movie. So it could cause damage after years, maybe even a shorter while than that, just by not teaching the right way or the right material. So, or teaching sensitive material. So it is a serious issue. The respect for boundaries is extremely important. So the Torah builds this model of the perfect government, or maybe the perfect nation, in the 10 chapters of BeMidbar, and really starts in chapter 10, verse 13. Vayis'u barishona al pi Adonai be'ad Moshe. They took their first journey according to the commandment of the Lord by the hand of Moses. So we have three elements: the people. What?
I was going to say, this is reminding me of our earlier classes in Genesis with the two different worlds.
Exactly. Very right. Very interesting. Like, it's the world of God and the world of men. And yes, but in reality, we have it all the time. Companies and schools and governments and programmers write programs, write systems. I mean, programmers are different because they rely on machines, but they rely on humans to feed it to the machines. But we have protocols for everything, and we hope that the protocols would make sure that everything would function beautifully. But the problem is that all these protocols, all these procedures, or plans, or programs have to be carried out by human beings. So we depend on human beings willing to do what they have to do. As much as we don't accept the excuse of I'm just a cog in the machine, but for a nation to function normally, we need to be cogs in the machine. The difference, I mean, this is where I'm very uncomfortable. I think everybody's uncomfortable. We don't want to think of ourselves as parts of a machine, right? So the difference is between the original program that is written. Let's look at an army, for example. Each soldier has a role, and each soldier has to know what is his role. But the commander cannot expect to know exactly where is every soldier at every given moment and direct his actions. Humans being need flexibility, but they have to, with the flexibility, operate within the system. But if at a certain point a soldier or commander in the field will make a decision that is not called for, is not scripted, right? But it will bring good results, then we will know that he, at that moment, assessed the situation and realized that his role is not to stay on one spot, as the book says, but his role is rather to save his troops. And maybe he does it by stepping out of that spot. So there's where the flexibility is. And that is, I think, what the Torah shows us. You could create the most perfect form of government, but if it's going to be rigid and on one hand, and on the other hand, if the people who are supposed to be those parts of a machine that works together in unison are not going to cooperate, then it's going to fail. So now I want to go back to chapter 1 and now review this whole thing again with this thing in mind. So we're going to look at the book where actually there are parallels between the first chapters and the last chapters, like Josh pointed out before. In the first part, like God's world, like Abby said, in the first part, the Torah says, "Be careful not to cross the boundaries, so the people of Kahat will not die." At the second part of the book, the people of Kahat cross the line and they die. Not only that, they die in a very specific manner. In the chapter that you mentioned before, chapter 4, it says that before they carry the tabernacle and they take all the utensils from within, in the same verse where it says, "Cut not off the tribe of the families of Kahat from among the Levites," they say, you Aaron and his sons, you will come and cover all the utensils, all the vessels of the tabernacle, and the people of Kahat will not go in to see the holy things as they're being covered, lest they die. So in English, it's lost in translation. They will not go in to see the holy things as they are being covered. But in Hebrew, the words for being covered is, look at this word, kevalar. What is the meaning of the word balar in Hebrew? Balar in Hebrew is to swallow. And look where it appears. And the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up. ותפתח הארץ את פיה ותבלע אותם ואת בתיהם. This is definitely not a coincidence. This is a sign that the narrator, the author, put for us to show the connection between the first part and the second part. In the first part, God says, keep your boundaries, don't cause something to swallow and or to be swallowed, and then this happens. So let's go again to chapter 1. What happens here is this. The Torah creates a census. A census is the first step in creating a functioning body. Whether it's a government or school, you need to know how many people, how many students, how many teachers, etc. So they go through the process and they count everyone. But look at the end of this chapter. The tribe of Levi should not be counted by them. You, and this is a word that repeats again and again, pekudim, pakad. Pekudim is both those who were numbered and to appoint. So God says, you shall appoint the Levites. They shall carry the tabernacle. They shall serve the tabernacle. They shall encamp and round about the tabernacle. They will build it and take it apart, and the man who comes near shall be put to death. And the Levites will pitch round about the tabernacle, and there will be no wrath upon the congregation of the children of Israel. Remember the word that was used after the rebellion of the sons of Korah. When the people said, now you're going to destroy us all, Moshe turns to Aaron and says, now go and bring incense to atone for their sin, for the wrath had begun. Here in chapter 17, verse 11, Ki yatsa haketzef milifnei Adonai. There is wrath going out from the Lord. See how we have this parallelism between the first part and the second part. So the chapter 1 is the census. Chapter 2 is now we start getting a visual image of how the people encamp to the east, to the south, the tabernacle in the middle, to the west, to the north, and concludes with Thus did the children of Israel according to all that the God has commanded. Everything is done by the book. Chapter 3. Chapter 3 is the census of the Levites. But let us read the first 4 chapters, 4 verses. Who would read that? Josh, okay.
Yeah, I can do it. Now these are the generations of Aaron and Moses in the day that the Lord spoke with Moses in Mount Sinai. And these are the names of the sons of Aaron: Nadab the firstborn, and Abihu, Eleazar, and Itamar. These are the names of the sons of Aaron, the priests that were anointed, whom he consecrated to minister in the priest's office. And Nadab and Abihu died before the Lord when they offered strange fire before the Lord in the wilderness of Sinai, and they had no children. And Eleazar and Itamar ministered in the priest's office in the presence of Aaron their father.
Okay. So this is the introduction to the census. What stands out in that introduction? Or what is strange? If it's an introduction to the census.
Is an issue that Nadab and Abihu died before the Lord? Where did that just come out of nowhere?
Right. No, so this is mentioned in Leviticus in Vayikra. We know that they died when they brought this foreign fire, but isn't it already? It's about time that we don't mention them in the census. They died.
Well, I guess the other thing that stands out is you have 2 verses that start with, these are the names of the sons of Aaron. Why is that repeated?
Right, it's as if saying we have 2 sets of sons, the sons that he has and the sons that could actually serve. And the 2 that are omitted are the ones that died because they brought a foreign fire. So, technically, when you have a census, you only count those who are living. There's no point. It should have been Ve'ela Shemot Bnei Aaron Elazar v'Itamar. These are the sons that he has. But the Torah makes a point to mention those who died and then say why they died, because they were makriv esh zara. They brought forth a foreign fire. It is in line with what we said before, that he who comes close and is not part of the congregation or not part of the tribe of the Levites or a priest, everyone in his own position will be put to death. So they die because of that. So that fits. That builds up for the next statement that says in verse 10, "Vehazar karev yumat." The common man that draws near shall be put to death. So we have both terms, karev and yumat. See, karev, azar, karev, ve'akrivam, coming close, they brought forth. Zar, foreign, zara, foreign in verse 4. Yumat will be put to death. Vayamot, they died. So this is in line of us understanding that we have to respect boundaries. And then the census of the Levites starts, and then again in verse 38, Ve'azara karev yumat. That is a recurring motif in the early chapters of BeMidbar. But now also, if you look later and read all these chapters thoroughly, and you'll see that what we have is the censuses, and then the visual image of how the camp is built, and it is really built in sort of concentric circles that spread out from the holiest of holy, which is the inner sanctuary, to the holy, the sanctuary itself, where you have the candelabra and the table and the altar. Then you move out to the outer court, which is also holy. It's part of the tabernacle. Around the tabernacle, you have the Levites, but there is a special spot for Aaron and his sons. Meaning, there's like the next ring of defense, and around that the Israelite. So this is a flat hierarchy. But if you would build it like a tower, you would see ring upon ring of command until you get to the highest of Moses, which is the inner sanctuary. So it's very clear that we have here this kind of hierarchy and boundaries that are being drawn. And in verse 15, verse 15 of chapter 4, we are told that Aharon and his sons must cover all the vessels, and then the people of God could carry it. As we said before, they should not see the holy as it's being swallowed in verse 20. And eventually they are going to be swallowed by the land, by the earth, because of the dispute of Korah. We find the census. Then in verse 5, we have this. So we have set, the Torah have designated for us the physical boundaries of the camp, right? And which is also, they're also tied to the spiritual, but they're physical. It's the inner sanctuary, the sanctuary, the tabernacle, the Kohanim, the priests, the Levites, and the Israelites. Each one knows his place. Now comes sort of a spiritual cleansing. People are being sent out that do not belong in the camp. That is, now we are in the outer world, sort of like the outside the camp. So there are boundaries within the camp, and then you have to filter. And again, it's for like a perfect society must not have any blemish, any spiritual blemish. Where are the spiritual blemishes? One is Tzarua. Tzarua is the one who is narrow-minded. Is plagued with a certain disease, but that's the result of his being maybe narrow-minded. V'kol zav, anyone who has a sexually transmitted disease, which definitely is not something that should stay. Someone who carries should not stay in the camp until he's cured. V'chol tamei nefesh, and all who is impure because he touched a dead body. I don't think we will have time to discuss it now, but my understanding is that the impurity of the dead is a spiritual one, meaning not spiritual in the sense of supernatural, but more a mental one. A person who confronts death or comes in close contact with the dead people, or either relatives or at war or something like that, becomes apathetic, becomes either depressed or violent. And the Torah does not want that. So first, this person is sent out of the camp to process what happened, and then he comes back and he goes through the process of para aduma, of the red heifer, which is in a sense it's a process of therapy. The priest should lead him through therapy and open his eyes to see that there is hope. But that's another. Hopefully we'll do it next week. Then, in verses 5 to 10 in chapter 5, we read about paying back any debt that you owe another person. That's another form of a spiritual blemish, because being religious or observant is not only about the laws of the sacrifice of the temple, but also about our commitments towards other people. And finally, two other types of people are sent away from the camp, or are singled out. One is the deviant woman, the other one is the Nazarite. The deviant woman is the example or the epitome of someone who follows desire to the extreme in a way that it would cause a person to be cut off from the people. Because you have to know, you have to be able to limit yourself of what is allowed, what is not allowed. Then the Nazarite is the other extreme, is the person who takes upon himself extra restrictions and measures because he's afraid he's going to sin. This is also unhealthy. You have to strike a balance. So now the Torah filters out of the camp all these people, and that brings us to chapter 6. 6 is the Nazarite. At the end of chapter 6, you have a blessing, because now that the boundaries were defined and we know who's who and what's what, now the people deserve that blessing. And in chapter 7, we're going into the offerings of the chieftains, which we will discuss, God willing, next week in our last session. So that is for today.
So I just want to